What's a secret you'll take to your grave, but can share anonymously here? I saw my niece's first steps. I didn't say anything to anyone, and then, a couple of hours later, when she walked again in front of her parents, I faked being surprised. My parents neglected their dog terribly, so I just took it and gave it to a shelter. They were furious, but the dog was literally starving to death. I never admitted it was me. I once stole a dog too. It was a little Chihuahua mix that lived in our neighborhood. It was completely emaciated, and it had a huge flea collar dangling on it, sized for a dog 4 times bigger. We think the neighborhood kids had been tormenting it, because it was terrified of children. Anyway, I took it and gave it to my wife's relatives. It's about 16 now, and still doing great. Fattened up, content, and happy. I reported my lifelong best friend to Child Protective Services. I came over to her house after she had kids, and it was a nightmare. The carpet was soaked with old animal waste, so much that it had gone white in places. The reek of cat urine hit you at the front door. Both little girls had severe coughing fits from the awful air. Mold, blood, dirt, waste, all mixed together everywhere. While I was there, I secretly photographed everything, and the next day I filed a complaint. After that, my friend called me in tears and told me they'd taken her kids and wouldn't give them back until she proved she could clean the place up and keep it livable. I pretended I had nothing to do with it. In the end, she got everything in order, and they returned her kids. Those kids didn't deserve to live in such horrible conditions, and I don't feel the slightest guilt for what I did, but I'll never tell her it was me. I want to add that I helped her clean the house so she could get her kids back. I love her very much. She just needed serious help, both psychological and physical. When my grandfather had his first heart attack and fell into a coma, things looked very bad. My uncle went to his house, supposedly to check on the bills, but really he started digging around. He found Grandpa's investment portfolio and discovered he had almost $3 million in savings and investments. Within just a few days, all hell broke loose. My mom and her siblings started fighting and literally clawing at each other over who'd get what after he died. But then Grandpa unexpectedly started to recover. He woke up, spent a few months recuperating, and then came home. Sometime later, he told the family that the whole time he'd been semi-conscious, heard them fighting, and decided that none of them would get anything. It would all go to charity. A year later, he had a second heart attack, and this one was fatal. The family rushed to divide the money again, but it turned out he'd kept his word. While still alive, he'd donated almost everything, leaving about $300,000. Per his will, most of the remaining money also went to charity, and the relatives got token amounts. We grandchildren were each left $10,000 in cash, and it was specified that from that $300,000, any student loans, mine or my cousins, could be paid off. And the rest was also to go to charity. My mom, my aunts and uncles, and his sister and her kids each got $100. The only exception was one of my cousins. After her husband died, she raised 3 kids alone. Grandpa had paid off her mortgage while he was still alive and asked her not to tell anyone. We only found out years later. So what's my secret? During the coma, Grandpa didn't hear anything and wasn't conscious. I was the one who recorded all their fighting on my phone and then played it for him once he'd recovered enough. It's because of me that they didn't get his money, and he told them he'd heard everything himself, so they wouldn't come after me if they ever learned the truth. In 1994, my best friend and roommate died. His huge family was asleep at the time, and I didn't tell anyone for a whole hour. He had AIDS, Kaposi's sarcoma, and non-Hodgkin lymphoma. He'd been unconscious for almost 3 days. 6 months earlier, he'd weighed about 77 kilograms, and by the time he died, less than 45. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in skin. A week before he died, his relatives came to stay at our place, his mom and his 2 sisters with their husbands. They all slept in the living room and guest rooms. Around 3 a.m., after I went to the bathroom, I came into his room and just sat next to him. About half an hour later, his breathing became slow and labored. I held his hand. Another half hour, and he stopped breathing. I didn't wake anyone, because his mom would have immediately called an ambulance, started CPR, tried to get him breathing again with a mask. She'd already been insisting he stay in the hospital and was very forceful about it. But he'd told both me and them that he didn't want any of that. He was wasting away and in severe pain without constant morphine. Afterward, I left the room and went back to mine. His sister found him about an hour later, and I never admitted anything. Love and miss you, Charles. It was the summer of '64. I was 12 at the time. I was crossing the parking lot by the library and saw that a '61 Chevrolet Impala had the key left in the ignition. I decided to borrow it and drive around town for 10 to 15 minutes. Then I returned it to the lot, but parked it in a different spot. I've never told anyone about this until now. Reminds me of a story my dad told me. At 14, he took his parents' car, pulled out onto the road, and stopped at a light right next to a neighbor, awkwardly waving at her. He was sure he was done for, but his parents never said anything, and he figured she just hadn't realized he wasn't 16 yet and didn't have a license. Years passed, and he and my mom moved back to the neighborhood where he grew up, and that woman and her husband still lived there. Dad had almost forgotten about the incident, but one day they were standing in the yard talking, and the neighbor was walking by, and she suddenly mentioned in passing that back then she'd just decided not to turn him in for driving without a license. When my mom's brother died, we went to sort through his things at his house. His sister was obsessed with not missing a single penny. Even though she already had access to his accounts, she was convinced he'd hidden cash somewhere in the house. While my mom was calmly going through things like a normal person, her sister took all the guns and tore the house apart looking for money. I'll never forget her saying, "Screw all this. Look for the money." In the end, she flipped out and left, leaving everything to us, my mom, me, and my husband. My son was about 2 then. He was running around the house and suddenly found a jar with $11,000 in cash in the living room. We were floored. I asked my mom if she'd tell her sister about it, and she said, "Yeah, I'll tell her when she's dead." We split the money, and it's still our secret to this day. My brother has a kid from a one-night stand. The woman was much older and kept the baby. He knows nothing about the child and doesn't want to. When my grandfather died, the relatives decided to bury him with the family ring on his finger, the one that had been passed down for generations and was supposed to eventually come to me. The ring itself didn't matter much to me. It's worth almost nothing. But the idea of burying a family heirloom seemed, and still seems, downright idiotic. On the day of the funeral, I quietly slipped the ring right off his finger in the casket and hid it somewhere safe. Several decades have passed, and I still keep it in a hiding spot. Someday, maybe, I'll pass it to my grandson and tell him the story. Or maybe not, I don't know. My precious. At a garage sale, my mom bought a small table that doubled as a locked display case for a spoon collection. I discovered it had a hidden lock on the bottom. The key was taped nearby. I opened the case, rearranged the spoons into 3 crosses, closed it again, and hid the key in my room. All of this happened to be on a Friday the 13th. The family was stunned. Nobody even suspected the case could open. And of course, I started repeating the trick from time to time, in bad weather, on Halloween, on anniversaries of tragic events, on days I didn't want to go to school. I did it almost all through my childhood. In the end, after 10 years, my dad just threw the table out. He was tired of everyone constantly getting spooked and screaming over it. An ex-friend of mine had no idea she was even pregnant. She ended up giving birth in her 9th month. They found a white powder in the baby's system. The whole time she'd been drinking, partying, and often blackout drunk. She was about 40. It later came out that her ex-husband, whom she had an unhealthy attachment to, was still around. And this guy had been convicted of child sexual abuse material and was a registered offender. Because of the substances found in the baby's blood, Child Protective Services got involved. She gave them my contact info and other friends' info, so we'd give her a positive character reference. Everyone else stayed quiet and didn't mention the ex-husband who kept showing up around the baby. But I told the caseworker everything as it was, sent over the court documents I'd found, and showed that he was in the sex offender registry. In the end, they took the baby away from her, and she was furious. I didn't care, because that baby had no mother who could protect it, and not even one of her friends would stand up for the child. Afterward, my conscience tormented me for a long time. I had a breakdown and worked through it all with a therapist. But as someone who survived abuse by my own father as a child, I couldn't pretend it was none of my business. From that moment, I cut her out of my life completely, and I've never once regretted it. My best friend took his own life while we were living together. He had a psychotic episode and harmed himself. I told everyone I was asleep, and only woke up when our neighbor's girlfriend, who found him, screamed. In reality, I wasn't asleep. I was lying in my room, terrified, because I could hear him walking around the house, talking to himself or to someone invisible, discussing how he was going to do what he did. I heard him going through the silverware and saying out loud which one he should use. I was sitting in my room with a big hammer in my hands, ready to defend myself if I had to. I was genuinely scared, and I never told anyone I heard all of it. And yet, he was an incredibly kind person. There had only been one time before when he acted strangely. But it later turned out there was schizophrenia in his family history, and it had most likely surfaced in him. And another strange thing. When the police came, they didn't take us to see him. They started interrogating us, as if we were to blame. Apparently, they found it hard to believe a person could do that to himself. In the end, they did let us go to him. The hardest part was watching his mom lose her only son. This story changed me a lot. I still miss him. He was an amazing person. But sometimes I still feel like a coward for not going out there and trying to stop him. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words. This happened more than 20 years ago, and I've more or less recovered. Although sometimes I still think about what happened, mostly with sadness and longing for my friend. Sometimes I remember his mom, especially now that I have a child of my own. And when something good happens to me, I sometimes imagine that he's somewhere nearby, watching over me like a friend. I just don't tell anyone the part of the story where I was awake and heard everything. That's something private between me and the universe. In high school, we were about to go on a small weekend class trip. There was a girl in our class I really liked and enjoyed talking to. She was raised by her father, a veteran with PTSD. He wasn't aggressive, but often hot-tempered. And she'd lost her mom as a child. She died of an illness. Despite all that, she was incredibly driven, strong, and confident, and never, ever played the victim or sought pity. We were different in a lot of ways, but that quality earned her enormous respect from me because I understood what she'd been through. One time we were talking about the trip, and I was excitedly telling her how much I was looking forward to it. And she casually tossed out, "Yeah, I'm not going, we don't have the money." Anyway, did you see? And immediately changed the subject. And I just froze. It felt terribly unfair to me, and the thought wouldn't leave me all day. So I decided to do something. I knew she was too proud to accept money, and would definitely be offended if I offered to lend her some. At home, I told my parents everything, and my dad suggested a plan. Talk to the teacher, arrange for the other students' parents to chip in a little, and tell her the tour company had one free spot. That usually happens when more than a certain number of students sign up. But this time we were short. If no one agreed, we'd cover it all ourselves. The next day I went to the teacher with this idea. I just asked her not to mention my name. And she ran the idea by the parents. Everyone was on board. In the end, my classmates told her a free spot had opened up. And she actually laughed with joy at how lucky she was. She came with us and had a great time. And I never told anyone it was thanks to me. It's not some heroic feat, but every time I remember it, I feel a warm satisfaction, and I'm proud of my 16-year-old self. My time has come. My wife loves Duolingo. She even has the premium that kills the ads. Their shop sells a plush owl. I bought it, hid it, then repackaged it, made a fake invoice with an address, and wrote a letter in their style. A week after she hit a 1,000-day streak, I left the package at the front door. supposedly a gift from Duolingo for the achievement. Inside was a congratulations card. Welcome to the 1,000-Day Club. My wife was absolutely thrilled and felt incredibly proud. Now that owl sits on her desk next to her computer. I originally did it as a joke, but she was so happy that I'll never be able to confess. In 1995, my mentor killed a man. The guy was a war criminal and basically deserved that fate. But that's another story. When my mentor died of old age, an illegal handgun was found at his home. Not the one from that story, though. The police opened an investigation. Meanwhile, they wouldn't release the body for burial for over 6 months, citing the ongoing investigation. In the end, we had to go to court just to bury him. I have his written confession and detailed documents about that killing, including how he tracked the man down. I was ready to hand it all over to the police and give them the chance to solve a major international case. But since they decided to act like jerks, I'm giving them nothing. I've never really stopped thinking about ending it all. I just have this feeling that I missed my moment. And now it's like I'm stuck in this life and can't just up and leave for the sake of others. Edit. I honestly didn't expect so many people to respond to this comment. For those who asked, I've been on medication for a long time and was in therapy for almost 10 years. I'm nearly 30, and I've lived with depression since I was about 11. I'm not planning anything, so don't worry. It's getting a little easier to manage, but it's a long process, and the feeling never fully goes away. To those going through the same thing, I hope we figure it all out someday. Since we're still here, there must be something worth living for. Thank you all for the support and your words. My husband found a little baby bird in the yard. Its life had apparently been hard from the start. It was missing one eye. We watched it for a whole week. It was learning to take off from the ground, and its mother brought it worms. My husband even set out a bowl of water for it. We named it Barney, and were really rooting for it. One morning I went out to check on it and saw that it had died. It was lying on its side, covered in ants. I put it in a box, tossed in a flower I picked from the garden, and carried it off. When my husband woke up, he asked about Barney. I told him I'd seen it take off early that morning and fly away with its mom. He was overjoyed and said, "Too bad I didn't get to see it myself." Now, whenever we see a similar bird, he says, "What if that's Barney?" and checks whether it has both eyes. I anonymously wrote to a woman I didn't even know and told her that her husband was cheating on her. The letter was only 4 lines. How long it had been going on, that he blamed her for being an alcoholic, who he was involved with, and that for Christmas, he gave his mistress the same jewelry he gave her. They got divorced. She started going to Alcoholics Anonymous and is now living her best life. And the mistress dumped him when she found out about the matching gifts. I found out that my grandfather's story about being an ordinary German soldier in World War II who just spent too long in Soviet captivity was actually a lie. He served in the SS and spent about a year stationed in the occupied East. He was later sentenced to 3 years in prison in Poland. He died over 10 years ago, and I never told anyone in the family. My father had a very warm relationship with him, and I see no point in destroying that image. 10 years ago, on the day that would have been my best friend's wedding anniversary, the first after his death, I anonymously sent his widow flowers. The note had just a few words. "I hope you feel loved and happy." I didn't sign it, to avoid awkward thank yous and explanations. A couple of months later, I happened to overhear her telling my wife about those flowers. She was convinced her husband had arranged it all in advance while he was still alive. With tears in her eyes, she said it was one of the most touching things he'd ever done. 10 years have passed since then. I keep sending her flowers on that day every year, always anonymously. She still thinks they're from him, that he planned it all ahead of time. I never corrected her, and I never will. A friend confessed to me a week before his engagement that he loved someone else but couldn't leave his future bride because both families had invested too much in the relationship. At some point, he just stopped thinking about himself. My friend killed himself because his girlfriend was hooking up with his best friend. His parents still don't know the real reasons. The story is so brutal and tangled that I don't even want to tell it. They knew by 9 a.m. that he was going to do it. but they only went to check on him at 5 p.m. when I got home, and it was no longer possible to hide. I still can't get past the moment I saw his body, and the thought that he was waiting for someone to come, and that they never told the one person who actually could have made a difference about their suspicions. I witnessed my wife's father die. He had cancer, and we were caring for him at home in the guest room. His son, my brother-in-law, took leave. He was a Marine, so he could make it in time to say goodbye. Right around the time he arrived, I went in to check on the patient, and as far as I could tell, he'd already died. But I didn't say anything, because my wife and her brother were just coming into the room. So they believe he held on until his son arrived, sensed his presence, and only then peacefully passed. I've told a lot of people this story, but no one believes me, so I guess I'll have to take it to my grave. In 9th grade science class, the teacher let us play with a little bottle of mercury. One kid opened it and poured some onto his hand. A girl next to him took off her rings and wanted to touch it too. While she was holding the mercury, that boy took her rings and dipped them in it. They were gold, but they turned silvery, like they'd been coated in mercury. She thought it was cool and put them back on. In her senior year, she was diagnosed with leukemia, and she died. Thanks so much for watching. In the comments under the video, write which story shocked you the most, and don't forget to check out our other videos. Big hug. See you tomorrow. Bye.